As OTAs approach, whose butt is getting a little warm on the Minnesota Vikings? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. What's up? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. On today's episode, we're going to talk about some warm derrieres, some hot rear, all right? Some high temperature. Couldn't come up with a good third one. We're doing hot seats. So there are a couple different ways to define what I kind of want to go for here, because some people have, the hottest seat, like an undrafted rookie. Well, that's maybe the hottest butt in the building, right? I mean, that guy's a long shot to make the roster, to keep whatever semblance of a hold on a job that he has. Max Brosmer might have the hottest seat here, right? If he doesn't even get a really good chance to compete for that QB2, QB3 job with Brett Rippon and Sam Howell, which, if things go the way they usually do, he might not even get to prove himself that much. But that's kind of a lame way to go about it, right? We're talking about people who have a hold on a job and maybe are going to lose it. And we'll see. We'll talk about a variety of importance of those jobs. But I suppose we should start with the highest profile people that are worth discussing if their seat is hot or not. And let's start with the wide receiver room. We'll also go into Kwesi and O'Connell and the assessment of their job security, which is probably pretty obvious to you, but we'll talk it out anyways. And then some other guys deeper on the roster who might really, really be fending off some stiff competition to keep their jobs. But let's start with the receiver room. This is the one that probably comes to mind. If I asked you right now, before I talk about anybody, I mean, I've said we're going to talk a little bit about some of the receivers, but outside of those, or maybe those are your guys, who do you think is the hottest seat on the Vikings? If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment. Who has the hottest, the warmest, clammiest butt? I'm trying to make it more cursed, but failing to do so because butts are only funny. I don't know how cursed they can be. But I'd be curious to know, before I say any names, who everyone thinks is the hottest butt. My guess is that the answer is going to be Jalen Nailor. They just drafted a third-round receiver that's got wide receiver 3 written all over it. Jalen Nailor has the job. He dropped a few passes. Everybody's really kind of frustrated with that, even though I think he did, on the whole, have a reasonable season. Wide receiver 3 ain't going to be perfect, but I thought he was fine and even really clutch at points. Especially at points where, Addison wasn't there to start the season. This is going to happen again, in all likelihood. Is Addison a hot butt here in the long-term sense, maybe? But, I think one of the key dramas of camp and OTAs is going to be Jalen Nailor and Ty Felton duking it out for wide receiver 3. And we'll call Rondale Moore a sort of a wild card there. Rondale Moore's knee, the last reporting that I saw on it was that it was not sure he was going to be ready for camp. So we'll kind of just have to put him aside until he's ready to go. Even if he comes in a non-contact jersey or something, we can start to talk about where that slots in. But not until he's there, right? It's really the two guys and then a slew of young upstarts that usually don't make the team. You've literally 7 guys from Lucky Jackson down through, undrafted rookies from this year, Thayer Thomas, Jayshon Jones, and then 4 undrafted rookies. And then also Tim Jones is around, although he is not somebody that you're going to pencil in for a whole bunch of targets. He's more of a special teamer guy. Which those guys also kind of are competing for a roster spot amongst themselves, but they're all new. So the hot seat thing is weird. So to me, the strongest challenger you're going to have for wide receiver 3 is Jalen Nailor. Now, I've come on this show a lot and I've said I'm taking Jalen Nailor in that one with a bullet in that battle, but I do think it will be one. Like, they will let them compete. I'm just predicting that Jalen Nailor will win. And the real key is that Jalen Nailor just runs a better route. Ty Felton has a better 40 time. If you remember, Nailor ran like a 4.5. He very clearly is faster than that. I don't know what happened on that 40 time, but that clearly was not as fast as he could have possibly run. I don't know what kind of speed we're working with Jalen Nailor, but it's clearly good enough. But Nailor, he just is going to be better at getting open. He's going to be better at fending off contact down the field. There are just a whole bunch of things to Ty Felton's game from scrimmage that are going to kind of anchor him and buoy him down that depth chart, while maybe you're giving him, the ball behind the line of scrimmage in one way or another and trying to make him do something with it. Or maybe you're going to try giving him a shot at the return role, even though there are like 3 other people that have more returning experience that he's going to compete with there. So like, that's also a hard job to win. But perhaps we hear a bit of a crackle, right? Maybe we're getting a little warm. Maybe the seat warmer is on, right? With Jalen Nailor. He is in the last year of his deal. And there, for anybody that's going into a true contract year, the butt is going to be a little warm just by virtue of like, you kind of have to, if you want to stay in Minnesota, and that's a big if, but if you do, you kind of have to do enough right now to encourage the Vikings to sign you between the end of the season and, March 10th or whatever the day is. You got to make them do it. And you have to give them a reason to actively go out of their way to re-sign you when that has not been part of their plan so far, if they're letting you get into a contract here. But maybe the spicier answer here is going to be Jordan Addison, right? What if Ty Felton is what if I'm like super wrong and Ty Felton is really good and he starts taking Jordan Addison's reps away? What if he just blows up? I mean, Ty Felton might have to be in the game on 11 personnel for the first 3 weeks of the season with Jordan Addison out, right? It'd be Jefferson, Nailor, Ty Felton. Like, that might have to be like that's a lot of reps. And eventually, you're going to be somewhere in that progression, right? Eventually you're going to see what if he really blows up and, knocks Jalen Nailor off, but then starts knocking Jordan Addison out of the wide receiver 2 job. And he turns out to be this total slam dunk draft pick. I'm not cocky enough to rule that out, even though that's not what I think will happen. Man, I've been certainly more wrong than that about a draft pick. So what happens in that scenario? And maybe that's the way to approach this whole thing is, what's the really good outcome? What's the really bad outcome? And what happens in either, right? The worst possible outcome for somebody like Ty Felton is that he ends up, he can't get on the field at all. He's below Tim Jones on the depth chart. He's below Lucky Jackson on the depth chart, who they keep on the team. And he ends up being wide receiver 6, and he's a healthy scratch, but they're probably still going to keep him on the roster, right? No matter how bad he is, they're probably going to keep him on the roster, at least for the first year, in a sort of Wyatt Davis sense, or a Chaz Surratt sense, where like, well, maybe, you're going to be dressing on special teams, but you're like too low on the depth chart and we're starting to get mad. But that's not a hot seat, right? A hot seat would be like if Jalen Nailor has a really bad camp. What if he just sucks? He can't catch a cold. He can't, he's suddenly slower. He shows up out of shape, right? Like the worst case scenario. If that happens, there's a world where he gets cut. There's only 1 year left on his deal. So at the very least, there's that aspect to it. Now, I think that would have to be a pretty extreme result that would fly really counter to what we know. But for Addison, what's the bad outcome here? Well, it's more long-term, right? The bad outcome is he plays poorly coming off of his suspension. He has run through all of his goodwill with the team. He doesn't play any better next year. Maybe he gets in trouble again even, and then he doesn't get his 5th-year option and he ends up walking, right? I don't think there's like an active cut that happens like Lewis Seen style. I think we're already well past that threshold, but that's sort of the bad outcome there. I don't think either of those seats are particularly hot, but you want to talk about contract years. What about Kwesi? Is his seat actually hot? Is there trepidation around the organization in terms of re-signing him or not? Let's talk it out next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. Look, we don't know how much more time we have with the Minnesota Timberwolves, okay? How many more games at Target Center there are. And if there is going to be, a Game 5, a Game 6, a Game 7 in this series, you're not going to have a whole lot of notice. And that is exactly where Gametime comes in. It makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer because people are just trying to get rid of their tickets. They're desperate. They're willing to offload them for anything, half price, like whatever. You can save up to 60% getting last-minute deals on Gametime, and they'll navigate all that for you to pass the savings on to you. Get their super cool, big red flame super deals. And the all-in pricing means that there are no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Next up, let's go into the staff here a little bit in terms of the hottest of the butts. The Vikings did make a couple of little changes. Mostly it was in losing guys like Grant Udinsky, so they needed a new assistant quarterbacks coach, that kind of job. And while that is not insignificant, it was a little bit of rearranging deck chairs, it was whatever. It's not like a structural thing. There are probably few seats in the NFL colder than Kevin O'Connell's. He's just won Coach of the Year. But it was interesting. I was actually listening to Heed the Call, which is probably my favorite national podcast that I'm not a part of. Go listen to Locked On NFL. But they were doing their around the NFC in 48 minutes thing. When they got to the Vikings, a large portion of the conversation was interesting to me. And that's maybe my portal into the national mindset more than anything else is that show. So maybe I'm overreacting to just their opinion. Maybe nobody else is talking about it this way, but they made it this teetering fall off a cliff vibe out of the Vikings situation. And their perspective, okay, I kind of get where they're coming from, right? You have Sam Darnold, you go 14-3, you let him walk, you go to the young kid. If the young kid goes 10-7, and you got 4 games worse by letting a better quarterback walk out the building, and if he plays better in Seattle, yeah, everybody kind of looks like an idiot, and you start to maybe get a little unrest in the organization. That extended to Kevin O'Connell insofar as O'Connell probably had a lot of input in that decision, and he has gone to bat a lot for J.J. McCarthy. He was, I imagine, completely and totally driver of the decision to draft J.J. McCarthy and how they had their quarterback board stacked up. And if you recall, throughout the entire combine, all of the reporting around the Vikings quarterback situation, you remember back when we weren't sure if they were going to keep Sam Darnold or not. And all the reporting was, what are they going to do there? Are they going to tag and trade? What's the deal? All of the reporting was ownership, Kwesi, and everybody else involved, Ryan Grigson, whoever, is Kevin O'Connell, you make the QB decision. We will you tell us what to do, we're going to do it. Because you've earned that with Josh Dobbs and making Sam Darnold a Pro Bowler and everything else. You clearly know the QB position better than anybody else in this building, maybe in this league. You make the call, we'll facilitate it. This was the call Kevin O'Connell made. We now know that Kevin O'Connell made the decision. Let us build around the kid. All right, J.J. McCarthy's our dude. We're going to parry away every other opportunity we have to even safeguard ourselves against, if he goes down, we got Sam Howell now. That's our backup plan. And we're going to fully commit to him. We're going to structure our offseason around bolstering his line, fixing the run game that he can, that we can use to kind of pair with him. Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, get these guys back healthy. And, roll into the season with the setup around the quarterback as best as possible, but it's J.J. McCarthy. It's not Darnold. It's not Daniel Jones. It's not Aaron Rodgers. It's not Kirk Cousins. It's nobody else. It's him. And they had those opportunities, so they said that. So I kind of get the idea that, if that goes belly up, that he's the one that sort of wears that badge. But Kwesi is the one that's going to, I think, get more of the flack, kind of no matter what, which is probably not like fair, but I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. So how hot is Kwesi's seat? Like Kevin O'Connell's seat, like, yeah, okay, if the quarterback thing that you kind of tied your career to goes bad, you get fired. That's true of kind of everybody. Like any coach in the NFL, your handpicked QB flames out, you're kind of cooked. But right now, like he's got a lot of leash. Like that's a that's an ice cold seat. Kwesi's seat, probably like room temp. I don't think it's like as cold as O'Connell's, but I don't think it's like warming at all. I know that some of you are really frustrated with the drafting, and I get it. The 2022 one went bad, and then there's Addison, which a lot of you just like to ignore, or maybe you don't like him because he got a DUI, and so you think that's a bad pick too. And then the second round pick that year was bad because they didn't make one. They traded it for Hawkinson, but you ignore that. And like we can kind of itemize down the list. A couple other guys get hurt. Dallas Turner didn't do enough. Like whatever, right? So maybe you don't like the drafting, but what Kwesi has built is not unrecognized in that building. And it's pretty clear to me, at least, the way that ownership talks publicly, which can always be kind of, drenched in platitudes and sort of attaboys, but also the way that it's reported by varying degrees of independent source, I guess is what I'll say. Like there are team mouthpieces, again, that are just going to kind of say the nice thing. But even when you get to the more independent types of report from people who don't have an inherent loyalty to the Vikings, even that is, well, the Wilfs understand that Kwesi has built a team that's gone. I mean, what is the record? Like 30-14 or something like that. This team has won a lot of games since Kwesi got here. A 13-win season and a 14-win season and a season where Kirk Cousins got hurt. It's a good resume no matter how you slice it. And to not credit Kwesi for it, you kind of have to say, okay, well, that was all just because of Kevin O'Connell, but then also not give Kwesi credit for hiring Kevin O'Connell himself, which was the literal first thing he did, was hire the head coach. That was like the first decision, and that one went great. He just won Coach of the Year. So you kind of have to acknowledge that was a good decision, but also simultaneously not credit the person who made that decision. But even as I say all that, the elephant in the room is that his contract still isn't done. Many a stub article, many a low effort chat GPT, but then rearrange some words has been written about, what was it too mean? About Kwesi not having signed his deal yet, right? Kevin O'Connell signed his deal early in the offseason. Kwesi it's been reported, confirmed publicly, pretty much as ironclad as NFL reporting gets, that a contract with Kwesi is in the works, that the two sides are working toward a deal, and one is going to come up sooner rather than later. But until it actually happens, people are always going to be like, is Kevin O'Connell really running things? Is Ryan Grigson really running things? That's a funny one that I've seen. Probably not. Otherwise, they would have just hired him. All right. They went totally off the beaten path and they hired a Wall Street analytics guy with no football background to be GM. If they didn't want that, they could have hired Ryan Grigson from the get-go if they wanted like a more traditional football guy, right? But Ryan Grigson does hold like a really important place in the Minnesota Vikings, much to everyone's chagrin, because everyone hates him over what happened to Andrew Luck, which is pretty fair. And he, by the way, would admit that it's fair too. Like he has his regrets over that and thinks a lot about what he should have done differently there. But he does hold like a really high place, and he's in all the brain trust meetings. Ryan Grigson has been a mentor to Kevin O'Connell in particular for a long time. And I believe Grigson and Kwesi cross paths in Cleveland, I want to say. So like they are very much close. And when you go into a meeting with three people, you come out with a certain decision made. Everyone had their input, right? And let's just not confuse input with where the buck stops. If you want to start saying that Ryan Grigson is secretly running the Vikings, well, then when they make a bad draft pick, you got to blame Ryan Grigson for that. You can't give him only the credit when there's a good thing, but then the guy that you want out because he drafted Lewis Seen makes a draft pick you don't like again, then we'll hold it against him, right? All this was a very rambly way of saying I don't think Kwesi's seat is very hot at all. I get why you could construct that idea from, well, the contract isn't done and there was this Ryan Grigson thing and the drafting's been bad. But I've been around, I guess, long enough to know the difference between a true hot seat situation and the opposite of that. We've seen how teams talk about their GM when it's shaky. We've seen how the Maras talk about Joe Shane. That's a scorching hot seat. We love him and we're about to sign him to a contract extension. We're working on that and we give him our utmost trust with the organization. Like, that sort of vote of confidence is not the unprompted vote of confidence in offseason forums where it didn't have to be said at all and nobody was really challenging it, is like a lot different from the dreaded vote of confidence for a guy 2 weeks before he gets fired after losing 40-0 on prime time. Like, it's a different vibe. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like, you see differences in the way that an owner will talk about a GM when they're happy with them versus when they're not. And every single shred of evidence we have about the Wilfs and their ownership group at large and how they feel about Kwesi is positive. So if Kwesi's seat is going to really get hot as GM, I think the Vikings have to fall off. They have to experience a couple of bad seasons, be in a bad situation. Or Rick Spielman style, there has to be some kind of internal tumult that causes that. But any reports we've had about that have been pretty difficult to verify and have sort of slinked away into the shadows post haste. Okay, so all of this is me saying, yeah, okay, these popular names for this are probably not the hot seat. But who actually has the hot seat, podcaster? Why don't you give us an actual answer? Okay, I'll do that next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business means you need the right expertise at the right time, and Upwork is a convenient and flexible way to find just that. You can connect with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. And whether you need extra hands or an actual expert in the thing, for a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. You can post a job for free and it's super easy. And instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps you find affordable top-tier freelancers that can scale your business efficiently without putting in a whole bunch of extra costs to your overhead. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Okay, here's some seats I actually do think are hot here on the Minnesota Vikings. They're a little bit lower octane, but maybe the hottest seat on the whole roster belongs to Brian Asamoah. He obviously never kind of came up to be the guy that you thought he was. It was a very similar situation. This is going to sound wild. Very similar situation to Laquan Treadwell and Adam Thielen. Or Lewis Seen and Theo Jackson, to be honest, where Lewis Seen and Cam Bynum being a lot better, and then Josh Metellus being a lot better than we thought, and all that, where there just wasn't room for the guy, but also the guy kind of isn't doing himself any favors. Ivan Pace, Brian Asamoah feels like that as well. Ivan Pace comes in and just takes that job from Asamoah, who I thought was having a perfectly good camp. I was at that camp a lot. And I liked what I saw from him there. He had a perfectly nice rookie season, but then things kind of fell off. He settled into this special teams role, and now here he is, right? He's linebacker 4, but he is not the guy getting in when Ivan Pace or Blake Cashman go down. It's Kamu Grugier-Hill. It's when Troy Dye was still here. He was behind Troy Dye on that depth chart. So it's been rough. And now, looking at the construction of that room, it's rougher, right? Cashman and Pace are still there, stranglehold on the starting jobs. But now you have Eric Wilson, who is veteran enough and has proven enough in this league where you absolutely give him pole position over Brian Asamoah for that like linebacker 3, that chief backup, the Kamu Grugier-Hill spot, that chief backup that's going to come in if either of the main 2 guys goes down, and then you have a draft pick in Kobe King. Well, look, a guy with 4 years of team control you just spent a pick on, who is kind of coming in as like a high upside potential dude that you don't expect a lot of like polish from right away, he can have a bad camp. Again, you think of like the scenarios. There's a threshold for a 6th round pick where that dude is all right. You're just butt and you're done, right? Like there is a certain bare minimum standard to which Kobe King has to find himself to actually make the team. But the way the Vikings have carried themselves with their drafts is even guys that are not rosterable will be on the roster just because you don't want to expose them to waivers in their projects, right? There's this long-term view. And I think that's very much an O'Connell thing, as evidenced by the way that he talks about OTAs, by the way. OTAs, not an evaluative place at all. Nobody is going to win or lose a job in OTAs. That has very much been a Kevin O'Connell thing since the day he got there. Everyone is there to just learn, get better. Nobody's sitting there and evaluating. We're not going to come up with a depth chart in May. We'll do all of that in camp when the competition really ramps up. But for now, let's all chill out and just try to get better. Which I respect that approach. But that also kind of tells me that, with younger guys, it can be a development curve. And he talks about it all the time, about how like certain guys there's a plan, and some guys their plan means you're in week 1, and some guys their plan does not mean you're in week 1. Maybe that's just cope for, we drafted some cruddy players and they can't play football yet, and they maybe won't ever, but we're just going to kind of save face in the meantime. Or maybe that's really how a coach wants to think about it, because their job is first and foremost to be a teacher. And you're kind of a crappy teacher if you expect everybody to come in and know everything they're supposed to right away. I was thinking about this the other day with Ed Donatel, because flamed out, it didn't work out, right? Schematically terrible. But Ed Donatel, like one of the identity things that really jived between him and O'Connell was that Ed Donatel was very patient, maybe to a fault, with his players. Everybody was... there was never, we can't do it. There's, well, we just can't do it yet, which is a mentality I really liked from him. And it's one that I think O'Connell has as well. It's there's no such thing as can't. There's just, we don't know how yet. And all of this is to say the upside rookie with 4 years of team control and that whole arc in front of him is going to get the nod over the dude that's already toward the end of that arc and hasn't hit his goals. In a similar vein, pretty hot butt for Levi Drake Rodriguez. It's the same group of defensive tackles plus Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, if you want to count him that way. I think he plays more of a Jihad Ward role, but Jihad Ward did play inside a lot. It was just like a lot of third down pass rushing, like NASCAR package stuff. But if he adds any roster pressure to this, you had 6 guys last year. 2 of them left in Jonathan Bullard and Jerry Tillery, and you're bringing back the rest of the room. Harrison Phillips, Taki Taimani, Jalen Redmond, Levi Drake Rodriguez, all still here, and you added 2 guys to replace the 2 that left in Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen. So you're 6th or 7th, Levi, and I liked what he did in the preseason last year. I thought he showed reasonable enough promise to make the team, but again, it was a little bit like, well, there's this undrafted dude that's actually kind of balling out. And it's a little bit like, yeah, okay, whatever you did in the preseason, Brian Asamoah, great job, but Ivan Pace is killing it, and he gets the job. And by the way, with Asamoah, the last couple preseasons have been pretty catastrophic for him, and I don't think that he's given us anything from scrimmage. Just to be like super clear about that, I don't think it's like an unlucky, oh, he would be so good if it weren't for Ivan Pace. Like he fell off pretty hard. But Jalen Redmond and Taki Taimani both outplayed Levi Drake Rodriguez in that preseason. And I think that is perfect. There's no shame in that for Levi Drake Rodriguez. A, you're a rookie, calm down. But B, those guys just played well. And, you played admirably as well. Those guys just did better. But you kind of can't afford to have that happen again. You got to knock one of those 2 guys off. And the Viking and prove that the Vikings should keep a 6th guy at your position again, even though you might not be You didn't dress a lot last year. So you have to kind of prove your worth on a 53-man roster where last year you kind of were relegated to healthy scratch most of the time. And if Taki Taimani and Jalen Redmond just have that job and the 7th round pick goes by the wayside, I don't think the Vikings are going to cry too many tears about that. Those are two pretty good players for rotational depth. But yeah, the seat is warm. All right. The cheeks are starting to sweat. The last one I'm going to give here is a little bit of a stretch. But you know what? I was going to say Gavin Bartholomew because there's 2 undrafted guys going for the job that he probably has a stranglehold on because he is like the clear 3rd tight end unless one of those 2 undrafted guys takes his job as a 6th round pick. But like I kind of said before, the Vikings are pretty keen on keeping their draft picks in-house, even if they aren't satisfied with those guys in terms of a roster. They're going to stash you and you'll be a healthy scratch every week at least. So that's probably not a good answer. The good answer is Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler, I think, has a hot butt. He is, again, another 2022 draft pick that is, so last year of his deal, you're not losing a lot of team control if you cut him, right? You already got 3 years out of this guy. Up and down. Struggled in pass protection at times, struggled with a whole bunch of stuff, and then you have guys like Xavier Scott and Trey Stewart coming for the job. I don't know if either of those 2 guys are like the kind of dude that can knock off Ty Chandler, but all it takes is one hot 4th quarter of a preseason game to start getting people talking. Like, y'all remember like AJ Rose? Or for maybe a better success story, because AJ Rose didn't make any team, Mike Boone. Or Rock Thomas, those 2 guys that find their way onto the roster just by having really good preseason games. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason are going to have that 1-2 punch on lock. This is all going to be about making the team on special teams and as that kind of last guy. But if Ty Chandler struggles from scrimmage and Xavier Scott, for example, plays great from scrimmage, it will be tempting to say, yeah, but we need a better running back 3. Both of these guys have injury histories in front of you. And maybe a spicier take in this same room is that Aaron Jones's seat maybe gets a little hot. If he misses a few games and Jordan Mason gets hot in his stead, then suddenly you could lose your job. But it kind of would take that, I think. I don't think if both these guys are healthy, I don't think I see a depth chart change coming. I think it has to kind of come in a situation where Jordan Mason gets an opportunity, then seizes it. So again, let me know who you think, who didn't I mention here? Who's got a hot butt that I didn't mention here? I poured over the roster. I honestly think a lot of the roster is pretty set. There are a few like key positions, but a lot of this is getting run back from a 14-3 team, as you would expect for a 14-3 team that's now, in the 4th year of the new GM's build is sort of, this is the vision of the roster that he wanted. So we'll see just how much of it sticks around. And then in the long term, which butts get a little bit hotter, maybe we'll do this again this time next year. I'll see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.